I don't usually talk about this. Hell, most of the time I've convinced myself to stay quiet. Because when you tell people a story like this, they either laugh in your face or give you that polite look that says, "Oh, okay, another crazy sailor's tale." But I can't keep it to myself anymore. So here it is. One night, a long time ago, the radio called my name. Not a voice from my ship, not one of my crew, not some joker on the other end of the channel. I mean the radio itself. Through the static, through that white noise that every sailor knows as the background music of the sea, I heard it. My name, spoken as clear as if someone were standing right behind me. And the voice, it wasn't quite human, not machine either. It was somewhere in between, like a recording that's been played too many times, warped by years and distance. It said my name, once. Then silence. I remember I froze in my chair, my hand halfway to the dial. I felt the hair on my arms stand up, my mouth go dry. You'd think in moments like that, a man would shout or call for someone else or do something. But I didn't. I sat there like stone, because deep down, some part of me already knew. This wasn't meant for anyone else on board. It was meant for me. It was decades ago in the late 90s. But I hear it still. Not every day. Not even every month. But every so often, when I'm careless and let the static play a little too long, there it is again. Just beneath the surface, whispering my name. Now, you can roll your eyes if you want. Maybe you think I'd been drinking. Maybe you think sailors like to make up stories when the nights are long and the ocean feels endless. But I'll tell you this straight. This is no barroom ghost story. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't tired. I wasn't dreaming. I was wide awake, sitting at the radio station of a working cargo ship halfway across the Atlantic, doing the job I'd done for years. And that's why it scares me. Because when something impossible happens while you're half asleep, you can shrug it off. You can tell yourself it was a dream or a trick of the mind. But when it happens, when you're stone sober, wide awake, your eyes on the gauges, your ears tuned to the frequencies, there's no excuse. I lived with that moment for decades. At first, I tried to forget it. I told myself it was some interference, a garbled signal, a pirate broadcast. You can talk yourself into anything if you try hard enough. But then the years passed, and I kept hearing it. Not every voyage, not even every storm. But sometimes, when the night was still, when the crew had gone quiet and I was alone with the static, it would come again. My name. Always my name. I got so I couldn't stand the static anymore. Even now, after all these years, if I'm driving late at night and the FM dial slips into empty air, that hiss makes my stomach knot. Because I'm waiting for it. I'm waiting to hear my name. And you know what's worse? I'm afraid that someday I'll answer. That's the part I never tell people. You can laugh at me for hearing voices in static, but I won't laugh back. Because I know what it felt like. I know it was real. And deep down, I know it was never just random interference. It was a call. And I was the one it wanted. So let me start from the beginning. It was the late 90s, before GPS made everything easy. Back then, we navigated with maps, compasses, and old radio sets that looked like they belonged in a museum. I was a young radio operator on a cargo ship, not glamorous work, but honest. The kind of job that wears grooves into your soul. Long nights, storms that make you pray, and endless stretches of ocean where the world feels like nothing but water and sky. Our ship wasn't much to look at. Steel decks scarred by rust, cabins that smelled of salt and oil, engines that groaned with every swell. But to us, it was home. We were a small crew, hardened men with too much time at sea, and in those days we worked without the luxuries you'd find on a ship now. So let me start from the beginning. It was the late 90s, before GPS made everything easy. Back then, we navigated with maps, compasses, and old radio sets that looked like they belonged in a museum. I was a young radio operator on a cargo ship, not glamorous work, but honest. The kind of job that wears grooves into your soul. Long nights, storms that make you pray, and endless stretches of ocean where the world feels like nothing but water and sky. Our ship wasn't much to look at. Steel decks scarred by rust, cabins that smelled of salt and oil, engines that groaned with every swell. But to us, it was home. We were a small crew, hardened men with too much time at sea, and in those days we worked without the luxuries you'd find on a ship now. I can still see it in my mind. The cramped radio room, with its flickering green displays and dials that never quite held the frequency steady. The smell of coffee that had been reheated too many times. The hum of the engine vibrating up through the deck plates. That was my world. And it was there, one stormy night in the middle of the Atlantic, that the radio first whispered my name. Not once, not twice, over and over. And not just a voice, a signal, a distress call, Mayday, a ship in trouble, coordinates given, a plea for help. Accept the call. It carried a date, 1973. And that was when I realized I wasn't listening to something alive. I was listening to something that shouldn't exist at all. The Atlantic at night is its own kind of world. If you've never been out there, it's hard to explain. But I'll try. Imagine the biggest, blackest stretch of highway you've ever driven. Now strip away the exit signs, the gas stations, the lights of distant towns. Take away the moon and the stars until there's nothing above you but shifting clouds and nothing below you but a road that never ends. That's what the Atlantic feels like on a stormy night, an endless void, broken only by the sound of waves slamming against steel. Our ship pushed forward through that darkness, a tired cargo vessel with an engine that rattled like an old truck climbing a mountain. The diesel growled and coughed with every swell, the whole hull vibrating like it might shake itself apart. Salt spray slapped the portholes, and the deck was slick with rain. You could taste the sea in the air, heavy and metallic, the kind of dampness that sinks into your clothes and doesn't let go. Back then, this was the late 90s. We didn't have the comfort sailors get today. No GPS beeping neat coordinates onto a glowing screen, no satellite phones, no automatic distress systems. It was old school. Charts spread across the navigation table, compasses that had to be checked twice, and a radio set that looked like something you'd find in a Cold War museum. I was the radio man. The radist, as we called it. My little cabin smelled like oil, coffee, and burnt circuits. The equipment hummed, green digits flickering, dials slipping in and out of frequency like a drunk trying to walk a straight line. It wasn't glamorous, but it was my post. My ears were tuned to that static, and I prided myself on catching faint signals other men would miss. That night, though, the air felt heavier than usual. The storm wasn't bad enough to panic us. Just heavy seas, a steady rain, wind that made the antennas moan. But there was a weight to it. The kind of pressure in the atmosphere that makes your skin crawl, like the world is holding its breath. I remember glancing at the compass lamp glowing on the navigation table. the needle trembling as though even it didn't want to point the way. We were a small crew, no more than 24 men all told. But you could measure the mood of a ship by its officers, and ours were a strange mix. The captain was a man of iron routines, dry, blunt, and stubborn as a rusted anchor. He spoke in short bursts, mostly orders, always chewing on the stem of an old pipe he never lit. His hands were rough, scarred from decades at sea, and his eyes were the gray of old storm water. He'd been talking for years about quitting, retiring to land, but everyone knew he didn't dare. Not because of money, but because he was afraid of what he'd be without the ocean. The first officer, our XO, or the mate as we called him, was the opposite. Sarcastic, quick with a joke at someone's expense. The kind of guy who never let a superstition pass without mocking it. He laughed loud, but under that laugh was something sour. Everyone knew he'd lost a brother years earlier on another ship. He never talked about it, but you could see the shadow in his eyes when a story about shipwrecks came up. Then there was the young deckhand, a kid compared to the rest of us. Barely in his 20s, with hands that still blistered from rope burns. Nervous, jumpy, and terribly superstitious. He carried a creased photo of his pregnant wife in his breast pocket, pulling it out whenever storms rolled in. He'd mutter old seafarers' warnings, never whistle on deck, never sail on a Friday, never answer voices you hear in the wind. The older crew teased him, but no one laughed too hard. Superstitions run deep at sea, even in men who claim they don't believe. And then there was me. I wasn't the bravest man on board, or the strongest, or the most respected. I was the one who listened. The one who sat alone in that humming radio room, coffee cooling by my elbow, headphones clamped to my ears, sorting through the static for something that mattered. I'd been told more than once that I was too jumpy, too suspicious. Maybe they were right. But it's that very jumpiness that kept me sharp. Because the ocean doesn't give you warnings twice. You hear it, or you miss it. And if you miss it, people die. That was the crew. Hard men, tired men, some broken, some dreaming of life ashore. And all of us that night, pushing through a storm that was rough but manageable. A night that should have been forgettable. But then, the radio spoke. And nothing was forgettable after that. It started like so many other nights. Static, the background hiss of the sea bleeding through the antenna. I was half dozing in my chair, eyes flicking from the green digits of the frequency to the damp streaks sliding down the porthole. And then, all at once, the static shifted. If you've ever listened to long static, you know the difference. It's like the difference between a crowd murmuring and a voice breaking through. At first, it was just a rise in pitch, a swell in the hiss. Then words. Mayday, Mayday, this is... I jolted upright, twisting the dial to sharpen the frequency. The voice was faint, warped, but unmistakable. The international distress call. We are sinking. Position, 26 north, 51 west. The hairs on my neck stood up. Coordinates, a real ship in trouble. I grabbed the logbook, scrawling the numbers, then froze. Because at the tail end of the transmission, buried under the Mayday, I heard something else. My name. I swear to God, clear as day. Akname, help us. I ripped the headphones off, my heart pounding. My first thought was that I'd imagined it. Fatigue, a trick of the storm, my mind playing games. But even as I sat there shaking, the transmission repeated, exactly the same, word for word. Mayday, Mayday. We are sinking, Position, 26 north, 51 west. And again, just before it cut out, my name. The captain arrived at my door as I replayed the tape. He leaned in the frame, pipe stem clenched between his teeth. Distress? He asked. Yeah, I croaked. But, sir, there's something wrong. He squinted at the log, reading the coordinates. Then his eyes narrowed. These don't make sense. The first officer barged in behind him, half laughing. What's the panic now? Ghosts on the radio? But the captain didn't laugh. His face had gone pale. And then he said the words that chilled me more than the storm ever could. This call is dated, he whispered. He tapped the log with one scarred finger. 1973. The radio room felt too small for the storm that had just rolled into it. The captain stood stiffly in the doorway, pipe stem clenched between his teeth, his eyes fixed on the logbook in my hand. Behind him, the first officer leaned against the bulkhead, smirking like this was all some private joke. And just outside, the young deckhand hovered nervously, his knuckles white around the photo of his wife. I replayed the distress call again, letting the hiss and crackle fill the room. Then the warped words, Mayday, Mayday. We are sinking. Position, 26 north, 51 west. The mate chuckled. Hell, I've heard CB radio pranksters do better than that. You're jumpy, kid. Shut up, the deckhand snapped. His voice cracked, high with fear. You didn't hear what I heard. At the end, he swallowed hard. It said his name, clear as anything. The mate laughed louder. Sure it did. Next, it'll be calling mine. Help! Help! This is the ghost of Billy the first officer. Give me a break. I slammed the tape deck to a stop, anger burning under my skin. It did say it. I'm not crazy. You think I don't know my own name? The room went quiet, the only sound the storm pressing against the portholes. Rain ticked on the glass like fingernails. The captain finally spoke, low and flat. This isn't a prank, not with coordinates this precise. He tapped the logbook with one scarred finger. But something doesn't fit. These numbers, they line up with a wreck, a ship that went down in 73. The deckhand's eyes went wide. Wreck? What wreck? The captain didn't answer. He just turned his gaze back to the radio, like it might offer him more. The mate rolled his eyes, but his smirk had faded. He muttered, Christ, not this ghost ship crap again. Enough. The captain's tone cut through the tension like steel. We'll decide what to do. But nobody. He glared at me, then at the boy. Nobody panics. Easier said than done. My pulse was hammering. Because deep down, I knew what I'd heard. My name. Not once, but twice. We sat in that cramped room listening to the storm and the static, waiting. The captain wanted proof. Something beyond coordinates, scratched in a book. So I queued up the tape again and let it roll. The message came through exactly the same, down to the second, a recording trapped in time. But then something new happened. The mate barked out a laugh, muttering under his breath, Waste of time, this is just bad radio. And from the speaker, half a breath later, the exact same words, warped but unmistakable. Waste of time. This is just bad radio. The room froze. The deckhand whispered, It's repeating us. The mate blustered, forcing another laugh, but it sounded hollow. Nah, that's just bleed-through cross-channel noise. But then the boy, voice shaking, said, Don't answer it. And through the static, half a second later, came the echo. Don't answer it. Identical. Same cadence, same terror. The deckhand backed into the corner, clutching his photo like a talisman. It's listening, he muttered. It's listening to us. I felt my own throat go dry. Because I knew static, I'd lived inside it for years. And this wasn't feedback. This wasn't crosstalk. This was something else. The captain stared at the speaker, his jaw tight. He didn't move, didn't blink. Just stood there, letting the hiss fill the silence. Finally, he muttered, "It wants us to follow." The mate shook his head violently. "Hell no. You're not telling me we're going ghost hunting in the middle of a storm." The captain ignored him. Outside, thunder rolled across the sea like a cannon, and the radio whispered again. My name. The bridge was tense when we gathered there a half hour later. The storm outside hadn't eased, but no one cared about the weather anymore. The real storm was in the air between us. The captain stood at the chart table, tracing the coordinates with his calloused finger. The mate hovered nearby, arms crossed, still pretending not to be rattled. The deckhand lingered by the bulkhead, muttering under his breath like a prayer. I stayed by the radio set, headphones dangling around my neck, ears still buzzing with the echoes. The captain finally spoke. "Those coordinates put the signal here." He jabbed the map. "Open water. But it's the same position logged for the cargo ship Maribel, lost in a storm 26 years ago. All hands gone." Silence. Just the hum of the instruments. The mate broke it with a sharp laugh. "So what? The dead are calling us for coffee? Forget it. We're not chasing fairy tales." The captain's gray eyes cut across the room. "If there's a chance, any chance, it's a real ship in distress," we answer. That's the law. That's the code. "No law says chase a ghost," the mate snapped. The captain didn't flinch. He looked at me. "You heard it? Twice?" I nodded, throat tight. "Yes, sir." And it called my name. The deckhand shuddered audibly. "Then we shouldn't go. Don't you see? If it knows us, if it knows him, it's not help we're sailing into." But the captain's jaw was set. His decision had already been made. "We go," he said simply. The mate cursed under his breath. The boy pressed the photo of his wife to his lips. I just stared at the compass, its trembling needle, and wondered if this was the moment we left the living world behind. The engines roared as the order went out. The ship groaned, turned on its course, and headed straight toward the impossible. And somewhere in the static, faint but certain, a voice whispered again, my name. It was close to midnight when the lookout shouted down from the bridge wing. His voice cut through the wind, urgent, strained. "Lights, bearing east." Every man on the bridge rushed to the windows. Out beyond the black waves, something flickered. At first, I thought it was lightning, but it wasn't quick and violent like lightning. It was steady. Lights, running lights. I pressed my face to the glass. Through the rain, I could see them clearly. A string of white and red, spaced along a massive hull. They bobbed with the swell, shifting in and out of view. But they stayed there. Solid, unmistakable. "There," the captain said quietly, pipe stem rolling between his teeth. His voice carried none of the doubt the rest of us felt. "That's her." The mate gave a sharp bark of laughter, though it didn't sound like humor. "Hell, you wanted proof? There it is. A damn ship. Not a ghost, not a trick of the air. Just some rusty freighter that never learned to file her position. but his eyes betrayed him. He didn't look convinced. None of us did, because no one had seen anything on radar. I glanced down at the green scope glowing beside me. Nothing. The screen was empty. Just the sweep of the line, round and round, showing a blank sea. Yet right out there, less than 2 miles off our bow, a giant ship burned bright against the darkness. My stomach knotted. The same sick feeling as when you're driving and the headlights pick out something in the road that isn't supposed to be there. The deckhand whispered, "Sweet Jesus." The captain didn't hesitate. "Bring us closer." The engines thundered and the ship turned toward the lights. As we closed the distance, the details sharpened. The hull was massive, bigger than ours by half again. But it was wrong. The paint was faded, streaked with rust that bled down the steel like old wounds. The bow rode low in the water, too low, as if it had been weighed down by years of storms. And yet the decks glowed with power. Floodlights burned, navigation lamps blinked steady and strong. And there were people. Figures moved along the railings, silhouettes against the glow. They waved their arms, gesturing desperately. Some even cupped their hands around their mouths, as if shouting across the water. The boy beside me gasped. "They're alive." His voice cracked with hope. "We can save them." The mate shook his head. "Impossible. If that's the Maribel, she went down 2 decades ago. Every man aboard was lost." I looked again. The figures were real. Too real. You know the difference between a trick of the eyes and flesh and blood. These men, if they were men, leaned over the rails, pointing, signaling, frantic with motion. But the radar still showed nothing. The screen glowed blank. The captain ordered the horn. A long blast rolled across the water, echoing into the storm. The ghost ship gave no answer. No horn. No radio reply. Only the silent dance of arms in the glow of their own lights. I felt the weight of dread pressing into my chest. Something was wrong. The movements of those men, they weren't random. They weren't even desperate. They were the same. Each one lifted his arm in perfect unison. Each one cupped his mouth at the same time, froze at the same time, turned his head at the same time. They weren't waving. They were mirroring. The rain slackened just enough to clear the view, and that was when the boy screamed. "That's me," he shouted, voice breaking. "That's me, right there." He slammed a finger toward the rail of the other ship. My eyes followed. My blood turned to ice. There he was. Not just a shape that looked like him. Not some shadow in the storm. It was him. Same narrow frame, same oilskin jacket, same photo clutched in one pale hand. A perfect double. And when the boy clutched his photo tighter against his chest, the figure across the waves did the same movement, the same timing. The boy staggered back, tripping over the threshold. No. No, no, no. I looked harder, and I saw more. Not just him. Others. On that rail, under those lights, I began to recognize faces. Movements, familiar stances. A man leaning on the rail with his arms folded just like the mate always did. A tall figure with shoulders hunched like the captain. And there, one that made my stomach drop. Myself. Standing at their rail. My same build, same posture, even the same nervous hand scratching at my chin. The figure's head tilted at the same moment mine did. I don't remember breathing. The world felt too quiet. Even the sea seemed to hush itself. The storm was still there, but it was muffled, like someone had stuffed cotton in my ears. The only sound was the hiss of the radio, faint but constant, whispering in the background. The captain finally broke the silence. His voice was hoarse. God help us. No one laughed at him this time. After the sighting on the horizon, the captain ordered the bridge manned at all times, but he allowed some of us to rotate below. We needed warmth, maybe something to settle our nerves. So a handful of us gathered in the mess room, a cramped, low-ceilinged space that always smelled of diesel, damp clothes, and burnt coffee. The storm still rumbled above, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, giving everything that sickly green tint. The first officer, our mate, poured himself a mug of coffee so black it looked like tar. He leaned back in his chair, boots propped on the edge of the table. The deckhand sat opposite him, clutching his photo like a shield, eyes darting every time the ship creaked. I stayed closer to the door, half listening, half straining for any noise from the radio down the hall. The mate finally smirked. "Well," he said, "I guess it's time for a story, since we're all playing at ghosts tonight." The boy snapped his head up. "Don't joke about it." But the mate was already rolling. He stirred his coffee lazily with a spoon, clinking it against the mug. "Old sailors," he said, "used to talk about something called a twin ship, a vessel that looks exactly like your own. You'd meet it in the middle of nowhere, and the crew on its deck were you, your doubles. Every movement the same, like a mirror floating on the sea." The boy paled. He whispered, "That's what I saw." The mate grinned, cruel in the low light. "Aye, and you know the saying? If you meet your twin, your time is near. The ship comes to collect you, every last soul." The boy muttered a prayer under his breath. I could see his hands shaking around the photo. The mate laughed again. "Don't piss yourself, kid. It's just an old story. The sea breeds them like flies. Every drunk in a port town's got one. Hell, half of them stole it from old poems." He shrugged, sipped his coffee. "But sometimes there's a truth hidden in the lie." I didn't laugh. Neither did the captain, standing silently by the bulkhead. The silence stretched after the mate's words, broken only by the hum of the lights and the storm outside. The boy finally spoke, his voice small. "If it's true, then why are we sailing toward it? Why don't we turn away?" The captain's eyes flashed, sharp. "Enough of that. We are sailors, not children spooked by bedtime tales." He spoke with steel, but his hand trembled as he adjusted his pipe. The mate chuckled low, though it didn't carry conviction. "See? Even the old man knows it's nonsense. A ship is a ship, nothing more." But I felt the air pressing heavy on my chest. I knew the difference between nonsense and something real. The story had scratched at something raw inside me, because what we'd seen out there, the lights, the figures, it had been too exact, too deliberate. And the radio still whispered when I passed the door, just faint underneath the storm. A hiss, a pulse, like breathing. I couldn't shake the feeling it was waiting for me to lean close again. I sipped my own coffee, though it tasted like metal. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The captain barked suddenly, as if to break the spell. "That's enough talk. Back to your stations. We're seamen, not old women gossiping in a market." The boy looked like he wanted to protest, but one glance from the captain shut him up. He tucked his photo back into his jacket and stood. I followed, but inside I felt worse than before, because I knew the captain was lying to himself. He hadn't laughed. He hadn't dismissed the story. He was afraid too, and fear spreads on a ship faster than fire. We were halfway down the companionway when it happened. The lights flickered once, twice, then died. Total darkness swallowed the ship. For 2 seconds, maybe 3, there was nothing. No glow, no hum of the bulbs, only the groaning of the hull and the crash of waves. We all froze where we stood. I can't explain it. But in that pitch black, I was certain we were no longer on our ship. I swear I felt the floor tilt differently beneath my boots, smelled rust instead of paint, heard voices whispering just beyond reach. And in that suffocating dark, one thought slammed into my head so hard it made me dizzy. When the lights come back, they won't come back here. They'll come on over there. On the other ship, the wrong ship. Someone gasped beside me. Maybe the boy, maybe me. Then, with a violent snap, the fluorescence flared back to life. The mess room glowed sickly green again. The hum returned. We were still there, but the silence afterward was unbearable. No one spoke, no one moved. Even the mate had lost his smirk. The captain finally broke it, his voice low and grim. To stations. We obeyed. But as I climbed back toward the bridge, my legs felt like lead. Because I knew something now. The blackout hadn't been an accident. It had been a warning. And the worst part? I wasn't sure which ship we belonged to anymore. By the time the blackout ended, the ship wasn't the same. Not in a way you could measure with gauges or instruments, but in the way men looked at each other. The mess room emptied in silence. Boots thudded on steel steps, water dripped from our jackets, and no one spoke above a whisper. On a ship, silence spreads like a disease. Back on the bridge, the captain stood at the chart table, his pipe stem clenched in his teeth, jaw tight. The mate paced behind him, muttering. The boy lingered near the bulkhead, pale, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. I took my place near the radio, though my hands trembled on the dials. The storm outside hadn't changed, but the air inside the bridge had. The mate was the first to snap. "This is madness," he barked. "We chase a phantom, the lights go out, the kid sees his double, and still you want to push on? We should turn back, now." The captain didn't answer. The boy spoke, voice thin and desperate. "We can't go closer. Please, you saw them. You all saw them." The mate jabbed a finger at the chart. "We're steering into suicide." I turned the dial slowly, static hissing in my ears. And then it came again. A voice, buried deep in the noise, pulsing like a heartbeat. My name. Mate name. I ripped the headphones off. My pulse hammered in my throat. The mate saw the look on my face. "What is it now?" "It..." My mouth went dry. "It called me. Again." The boy whimpered. The mate threw up his hands. "See? This is what happens. We're hearing things. The sea makes fools of men, and now we're all chasing shadows." The captain's voice cut through, low and deadly. Quiet. The bridge fell silent. He straightened, pipe clenched, gray eyes fixed on the horizon. "We don't run. Not while I command this ship. Whatever's out there, we face it." The mate swore under his breath. The boy clutched his photo to his chest. And me? I just stared at the silent radio, waiting for my name again. Later, as the crew cycled through their watches, the boy vanished below decks. No one noticed at first. Everyone was too rattled, nerves stretched to breaking. When he stumbled back up, his face was white as chalk. He held something in his hands, dripping onto the steel floor. A jacket. It was soaked, as if dragged from the sea, water pooling at his boots. And stitched inside the collar, the tag bore his name. Not just his name, his handwriting. He stared at it like it was a corpse. "It was in my bunk," he whispered. "Right there, laid out like someone had put it there for me." No one spoke. The only sound was the drip of seawater onto the deck. The mate tried to laugh, but it came out broken. "You're mistaken. It's someone else's. Just a jacket." The boy shook his head violently. "No, it's mine. The seams. Look here, I sewed this myself. And this stain from oil back in port. It's mine. But I left it there. Dry. And now..." He broke off, shuddering. "Now it's wet. Salt water. Like it's already been to the bottom." He dropped it. The splash of seawater spread across the deck plates. I couldn't look away. I felt the same crawling dread I'd felt during the blackout. The line between us and them, between our ship and that other one, was fraying. Objects didn't belong anymore. Not to one world, not to the other. The captain stared at the jacket for a long moment, then turned away, as if refusing to acknowledge it. "Back to stations," he said gruffly. But his voice lacked its usual steel. The boy just stood there whispering, "They've already been here." And none of us could argue. It happened near dawn, though the sky was still black with storm. The ship lurched, hard. Men were thrown against bulkheads, mugs shattered in the mess, tools clattered across the engine room. It felt like we'd slammed into a reef, except there was nothing. No land for hundreds of miles. The captain gripped the chart table, knuckles white. "Report!" The lookout shouted down from the wing. "Nothing. Open water." But the ship groaned beneath us, a deep, shuddering moan that echoed through every rivet. The boy screamed, "It's them! They've hit us!" The mate yelled, "Impossible! There's nothing here!" I pressed against the window. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw it. Another hull, pressed against ours in the rain, steel against steel. But when the lightning flashed, the sea was empty. Another jolt shuddered through the vessel. The deck pitched hard, men sliding, cursing, grabbing for rails. The radio on my console crackled to life, spitting static like laughter. And then, through the storm, I heard it again. My name. The captain's voice boomed over the chaos. "Enough! Ready the lifeboat! We go to them!" The mate stared at him like he was mad. "To them? To them!" the captain roared. The boy sobbed openly. I felt my stomach lurch. The engines roared louder as men scrambled. Orders barked, steel clanged. The crew moved like ants, some in fear, some in blind obedience. We were preparing to leave the safety of our ship, preparing to cross into whatever waited for us on that rusted giant. And as the storm howled, I couldn't shake the thought. Maybe we already had. The lifeboat groaned on its davits as we swung it out into the rain. Steel shrieked against steel, ropes hissed through blocks, and the deck pitched under our boots like a living thing trying to buck us off. The captain barked orders in short, clipped bursts. The mate repeated them, louder, like he could shout the fear out of the air. The young deckhand, our kid, stood with one hand on the rail and the other clenched around that creased photograph of his wife. He put it inside his jacket and zipped it to the throat, like armor. "Lower away," the captain said, and we dropped. Cold spray hit my face so hard it stung. We thumped into the water and the lifeboat went light, bobbing on the black backs of waves. Above us our ship loomed, all wet iron and ghost green lights. Ahead of us, the other one, the rusted giant. Closer now. Too close. We pulled on the oars. The motor was unreliable in weather like this, and none of us trusted anything that hummed. The captain took the tiller in back. The mate and I pulled. The boy pulled and sobbed and kept his eyes down. I tried not to look at the ghost ship. I tried to keep my breath steady. But the sea forced me to look, on every rise of the swell. Her hull towered like a cliff. Rust streaks ran down her flanks in bloody curtains. Floodlights burned along the catwalks, harsh and white, blinding in the rain. And the figures, God help me, the figures lined her rails 3 deep. They didn't wave anymore. Not the way we first saw them. They moved, yes, but not to signal. They moved as we moved. When my oar dipped, 3 dozen arms dipped. When the mate grunted, 3 dozen shoulders twitched in the same rhythm. When the boy swiped his sleeve across his face, 3 dozen heads jerked in the same nervous flick. It was like staring into a wall of mirrors that lagged a heartbeat behind. Eyes forward, the captain said, voice flat. Row. I rowed. The oarlocks squealed. The water was heavy as if thickened by oil, dragging at the blades. Each pull took more from my arms, and each pull multiplied itself on the deck above. Our copies, their copies, until the whole scene felt like a loop we couldn't escape. We came beneath the overhang of her hull, and the sea went darker, like we ducked beneath a thunderhead. Up close, the floodlights didn't illuminate so much as they carved shadows from rain. Ladders, cranes, the rectangular teeth of stacked containers. And faces. So many faces along the rail, all turned down, all watching us with one expression. A tense, expectant blankness. Like actors holding for a cue. Listen, the boy whispered. Do you hear it? At first I heard only the rain and our ragged breath. Then I noticed it. The soft hiss of a radio somewhere up there. Not a broadcast, not speech. Just that thin, hungry noise you get when the dial lands between stations. It leaked from the floodlit decks the way steam leaks from a broken pipe, constant, low, insinuating. I risked one glance at the captain. The pipe stem chewed between his teeth was mangled to splinters. Stand by, he said. We'll come alongside the ladder, hands ready. We nudged into her shadow. The bow of our lifeboat kissed the ghost hull with a hollow tap that went through my bones. Then, from above, a ripple ran through the watchers. For a fraction of a second, they didn't mirror us. Their heads tilted, not with ours, but together, like a single creature sniffing the air. And the radio hiss rose. We found the ladder, rope and wood, ragged with salt and time, dangling from a porthole like a tongue. The mate reached for it. Above us, 100 hands reached for an invisible rope at the exact same angle, the exact same height. The captain hesitated. The kid made a sound, half laugh, half sob. Hold, the captain said. Hold. The floodlights shifted. Somewhere on the higher decks, a searchlight swiveled with a motor's slow whine, hunting. Don't look at it, the mate muttered. But his eyes were already pulled up like iron filings to a magnet. I followed his gaze in spite of myself. The beam slowed, found us, stopped. We were pinned to the water, bleached to parchment. Our faces lost color, our shadows fell away. The boy's scream stuck halfway in his throat. The mate flinched and turned his head, but he couldn't turn his eyes. None of us could. Up on the rail, one figure stepped forward from the line. It moved like the captain, stood like the captain, even held its jaw like the captain, lips pressed thin around an invisible pipe. "Sir," I said. But the word wasn't mine alone. It came from the deck above, too, a moment later, in the wrong voice and the right one, and a dozen imitation throats. The captain stood up in the stern of the lifeboat as if someone had lifted a string tied through his spine. He stared at the figure that was him. "Who are you?" he said. Not loud, but steady. The figure cocked its head in the same measured angle. It didn't answer with a mouth. The searchlight intensified until the rain turned to needles. The beam seemed to carry sound with it, like a hose carries water. A thin thread of static poured down the column of light and wrapped around us. It crawled over our jackets, it whispered in our ears, it tickled the mouths of our oars. And then it found a home, in the captain's double's eyes. I swear to you I saw it. Not light, not reflection, sound. Sound pouring out of those eyes as if they were two little speakers set into a skull that wore his face. The pupils shimmered with a grainy gray, like a detuned television. The lids flickered with the rise and fall of noise. When the figure blinked, the static cut and returned as crisp as a radio's hard switch. The boy covered his ears. The mate spat a curse that didn't make it past his lips. The double didn't talk. It opened its mouth, yes, and the shape of it made a word that was almost familiar. But what came out was the whisper of every broken signal I've ever chased across the band. It carried voices buried inside it, like fossils in shale. Not words yet, just the pressure of language, crushed to hiss. The captain, God save him, stepped up on the lifeboat's thwart and raised his chin into the beam. The sound pressed his hair back against his skull. "What do you want?" he said. Our captain in the light didn't move his lips. His mouth stayed open in that half-O shape. But his eyes spoke. A burble of sound that crawled over the skin like ants. And in that sound, a shape formed, the way a face forms in fogged glass when you breathe on it. It was his own voice. "Steady as she goes," it said. Not now, then. Words he had spoken hours earlier on our bridge. The mate's bravado cracked. "It's playback," he whispered. "It's playing us." Static bloomed brighter in those eyes. Another layer of speech rose out of the first, like a second wave eating the last. Our voices again, laced together and out of order, stolen and reissued. The boy's prayer, the mate's profanity, the captain's quiet command. My own muttered, "God help us." A chorus with no melody, only a terrible memory for tone. All around the rail, the other figures leaned in, as if the sound drew them. Their mouths opened and shut in unison, like fish in a tank when someone taps the glass. None of them formed full words. They didn't need to. The sound did their speaking. It came from everywhere now. The floodlights, the ladders, the rivets, the open mouths, the eyes, the eyes, the eyes. "Backwater," the captain said. But the command arrived from above half a second later and canceled itself out. I pulled. My copy pulled. The sea resisted both of us, and neither of us gained. "Sir," I said, "we have to go." The captain didn't answer. He stared up at the face that wore him. It stared down. In that moment, something passed between them that wasn't sound. It was recognition. The brief, hateful recognition of a man who understands his reflection is not a trick. Then the double blinked. When it opened its eyes again, the static sharpened, and a single word stepped forward from the noise as if it had been called by name. "Answer." We all heard it. Not loud, not booming. Not a command in the human sense. Just a nudge under the ribs of the world. "Don't," the boy begged. He didn't know who he was addressing anymore. The captain. Me. Himself. The captain's jaw worked. His pipe stem fell from his teeth and bounced silently in the drowning light. I could see the decision harden in him like frost. "Easy," the mate said, a hand up. "Old man, easy." The searchlight flicked sideways. For a heartbeat, the beam swept across the line of watchers, and I saw us all up there. Two of each of us, bright as cuts on film. The boy with his photo, the mate with his crooked grin, me with my hand on my chin. For that heartbeat, our doubles didn't mirror us. They anticipated us. They moved a blink before we did, as if we were learning their steps. And then the light snapped back to the captain's double. The static spiked. The air rang like it does beneath power lines in the heat. "Answer," the ship whispered. The radio on our lifeboat, old, salt-scabbed, sworn at 1,000 times, crackled to life on its own without a hand laid to it. The speaker rattled with dust and age. It didn't carry a channel. It carried a hunger. It said my name. It said it the way a thing says a word it has practiced in the dark. The boy covered his face. The mate grabbed the radio and shook it like you could shake sense into a snake. The captain didn't move at all. "Sir," I said, and I don't know whether I meant don't or do. He opened his mouth. Lightning hit somewhere far astern, and the flash came late and white. It made a dim X-ray of the captain's double, bone under light, a skull whose sockets buzzed. And then the sound broke into parts. If you've ever stood between two radios tuned to almost the same station, you know the feeling. The way the words tear themselves and double back. How a syllable furlongs into a moan. Now imagine 100 radios, each tuned to a different time. Our voices layered. They didn't play once, they piled. The mate cursing in present tense. The boy praying yesterday. The captain issuing an order he hadn't given yet. My name, said in a dozen versions of my voice. All wrong, all right. Stepping on each other's heels until the single word became a staircase that went nowhere. The static filled our mouths. It poured into our ears. It pressed on our chest like a hand trying to open us. "Answer," the ship breathed again, and something in me wanted to. Not because it commanded, because it felt like the relief you get when you finally scratch a terrible itch. That's the danger, I think, of certain calls. They don't force, they invite, in the exact tone you've been waiting for, without knowing why. "Back water," the captain said, hoarse. "Back water," the ship said in a dozen broken throats. We pulled. Oars bit. The sea held. "Cut the line," the mate shouted, though there was no line to cut. A low tremor rolled through the rusted giant, as though it were clearing its throat. The floodlight stuttered once, then steadied, then dimmed by degrees. You felt more than saw. The watchers at the rail leaned further out in the fading light. Their faces lost detail. They became hollows, and those hollows filled with the gray of radio snow. The beam on the captain's double wavered. The white washed to yellow, the yellow to a dying ash. "Hold," the captain said again. Not to us, I think, but to himself. His double made the word a moment sooner, then a moment later, then in a layered smear that couldn't make up its mind. The boy whispered, "Please," to no one and to the sea. One by one, the lights along the ghost ship winked out. A row on the aft deck, then the catwalks, then the mast lamps, dropping like stars shot from the sky. With each failure, the chorus thinned, until the only sound left was the hiss in the captain's double's eyes. Then even that sputtered. For a second, the sockets were just sockets. Darkness took the face. Something in my head unclenched, and I realized I'd been clamping my jaw so hard my teeth hurt. The sea breathed. Another lightning flash, bluer and farther. In the afterimage, I expected to find the giant still looming. But the swell rose, and there was nothing there for the water to shoulder against. Our boat bobbed undisturbed where a wall of steel had been. The smell changed. Less rust, more rain. "Where?" the mate began, but his voice broke into a laugh that wasn't humor. "Where the hell?" A thump came from 20 feet off our bow. Not loud, not dramatic, just the suggested weight of wood against wave. We all turned. In the gap where the ship had been, something floated. A small oval, low orange beneath the wash of rain. It spun once, twice, as if still deciding which world to belong to, then steadied between swells. A life raft. No ship, no men at the rails, no ruin, no wreckage. Only that raft, bobbing gently like a punctuation mark at the end of an unfinished sentence. The captain let out a breath I didn't know he'd held. He sat finally, and the boat shifted under his weight. The pipe stem he'd dropped earlier rolled in the bilge and struck my boot. "Bring us alongside," he said. We pulled. The raft thumped our bow and knocked hollow. Its painter line trailed like a limp vein. The mate snagged it with a hook. The boy reached, hesitated, and then, because there was nothing else to do, and because people do what they're trained to do, even when training no longer applies, he grabbed the raft's handle. Closer now, I could see the stenciling on the canopy, white letters half scrubbed by salt. I could see a patch where a number had been painted over and repainted. I could see the water beads clinging to the fabric as if they had decided this was home. "There's something inside," the boy said. The captain nodded once. "Open." The mate unzipped the flap. The smell came out first, not rot, not yet, but the sour collision of rubber, salt, and time. The boy gagged. The mate spat into the sea and wiped his mouth. "Anything?" I asked, though my voice sounded like it came from the wrong chest. "Bag," the mate said. "Box." He dragged out a waterproof satchel, the kind that always feels heavier than it ought to. Then a second. Then a third container, metal, pitted, latched shut. He shoved them into the lifeboat, and the raft rocked, whispering against our hull. "Close it," the captain said. The mate zipped the flap and let the raft go. For a 6-second, I thought it would vanish, sink, or simply not be there when we looked again. But it stayed. It bobbed away into the dark like a thought you can almost remember. We sat and breathed and rocked and didn't speak. The sea around us had that special quiet after a scream where your ears don't trust themselves. The rain was softer. The wind had lost its teeth. In that hush, the radio in our boat gave a last polite cough of static, like a guest clearing his throat to excuse himself. It didn't say my name. "Back to ship," the captain said at last. We turned the lifeboat's nose toward the faint lights of our own vessel, which looked suddenly smaller than I remembered. We pulled, and the oars pushed water that felt thin again. Ordinary. The mate kept a hand on the satchel, as if it might wriggle free. The boy stared over his shoulder toward the place where the giant had been. "Did we?" He started, then stopped. "Did we actually see?" "Yes," the captain said. "Nothing else." I didn't look back. I kept my eyes on the dim warmth of home, and counted my breaths. Because I was afraid if I looked into that leftover dark, I'd see the searchlight find me again and feel sound pour into my skull through my eyes. Halfway home, another wave lifted us. In its crest, I thought I heard voices again, a braid of syllables so thin you could break it with a cough. I held my breath. The wave passed. The braid unspooled into normal water noise. Almost there, the mate said, more to himself than to us. We made the fall line. We clipped on, we rose, we swung, we thumped onto our deck with knees that didn't feel like ours. Men ran, hands grabbed, ropes sang. The mate shoved the satchel into my arms. "Radio man," he said. "Log it." As if there were a logbook for any of this. We followed the captain inside. The ship welcomed us with the old familiar stinks and the slow, forgiving tremor of her engines. For a second, I could have believed none of it had happened, that we'd lost an hour dozing and dreamed a storm. Then the captain stopped in the passage and looked back at the black smear of sea. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. We all knew what he was thinking. A ship the size of a building had stood there under lights bright enough to blind a man. It had stared back at us with our own faces. It had asked for an answer. And when we didn't, it had taken its question away and left us a reply of its own. The raft, the bag, the box. We didn't open them on deck. We didn't open them in the hall. We waited until the door to the radio room was shut, until the storm's voice was a rumor in the bulkheads, until the captain set the bag on my table with a care that looked too much like reverence. "Open," he said. I reached for the latch, and for just an instant, I promise you, it was only an instant, I heard the faintest thread of static beneath the room's hum, like a breath drawn in before a word. Then I flipped the clasp. We shut the radio room door behind us, like men closing a vault. The storm outside became a muffled rumor, the long bones of the ship humming underfoot. Fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead, washing everything in their tired aquarium light. The captain set the satchel on my table with both hands, like it might slip away if he let go. "Open," he said. My fingers weren't steady. The zipper was stiff with salt and grit. It rasped like sandpaper when I pulled. Inside, something wet shifted with a heavy, patient weight. The smell rose up. Rubber, brine, metal gone sour. The same way a wave creeps over your boots if you misjudge the tide. I reached in first. My hands came out with a book. Not a book the way you might picture one. Not a diary with a lock and pretty paper. This was a watch log. Thick, cloth-bound. The kind that lives beside a compass and collects years like dust. Water had swelled it until the spine bulged. The canvas cover was the color of old rope, stenciled in faded letters that had run in the wet. The corners left a dark stain on the table when I set it down. The mate leaned over my shoulder. "God," he said softly. "Look at it." Beneath the log was a radio. Older than any handheld I'd used in years, a brick of a thing with a cracked rubber antenna and a corroded speaker grill. The casing was sun-faded. The battery compartment showed rust on rust. It looked like it had drowned and been dragged back against its will. I turned it in my hands and felt the weight of sand in its guts. Heard it shift when I tilted it, like a pocketful of beach. "Dead," the mate said too quickly. "Has to be. Throw it in a locker." "Leave it," the captain said. I set the radio down beside the log. The way it sat there on the steel made me uneasy. It didn't belong to our room, our ship, our time. Even the numbers screened faintly on its dial were wrong, like a calendar from another year. The captain tapped the swollen book with his knuckle. We start there. We see who sent the raft. He didn't say the rest. We all heard it anyway. We see who stared at us from our own faces. I opened the cover. The first pages stuck together with a sound like a tongue pulled from the roof of a mouth. Salt had scabbed the paper into brittle planes, but under the grit the ink still lived. The writing was tight and deliberate, lines of black that refused to blur, the hand of a man who believed in order even at sea. The dates lined up near the top of each page, small and neat. June 1973. July, August. My throat felt tight. I didn't look at the captain. I didn't need to. I began to read. At first, it was the kind of thing I'd written 100 times myself. 0400, 0800. Seas moderate, wind freshening from the west. Engines normal, course maintained, coffee poor, communion with Marconi satisfactory. The mate snorted at that last, a thin laugh he couldn't quite keep out. Old men used to write like that, little jokes they thought only they would see when the log came back to port. The captain's face didn't change. Next entry, 80800, 1200. Rain intermittent, cargo secured, crew in fair spirits, wireless static prevalent, no cause for concern. XO suggests new broom for forecastle. Denied. The boy had edged close without me noticing. He stood to my right, damp hair plastered to his head, the corner of his wife's photo peeking out from his jacket. His breathing had calmed. Having something ordinary on the table had done that. Ordinary is a powerful drug at sea. I turned a page. The paper let go reluctantly. 1200, 1600. Barometer falling. Clouds lowering. A conversation about baseball in the mess. Cookie burned stew again. 40 fathoms under keel. All's well. I heard the mate breathe out, a little louder than he meant to. It was like a hand finding a handhold in the dark. Storm or no storm, ghost lights or not, this was a ship's life. The small complaints, the tiny jokes, the discipline of ink. The next page felt thinner beneath my fingers, as if the man who wrote it had pressed lighter with his pen. 1600, 2000. Static persists, now with a peculiar tone. Describe, like wind whistling in a bottle. No contact on scheduled calls. Lights on horizon presumed trawlers. XO says ghost fleet, earns laughter. The mate's mouth twitched. He didn't laugh this time. 2000, 0000. First strange occurrence. Wireless repeats our weather report with delay of 2 seconds. Tested 3 times. Same result. No other vessels claim responsibility. Crew uneasy. I will not indulge superstition. The boy's hand snuck toward the table and curled on the steel edge. His knuckles were white. He whispered. 2 seconds. As if the number had teeth in it. I turned the page. The ink had gone darker now, more hurried, as if the pen had been clenched harder. 000400. Smoke on water that is not smoke. A light that is not our light. Men at the rail, waving, then not waving. They move like a drill team. One mind in many bodies. Radar shows nothing. The sea does not know them. I ordered no approach. He had underlined that last sentence twice. The line cut the paper. The captain stared at those grooves. The room hummed. One of the fluorescent fixtures buzzed louder and then settled, as if remembering itself. I went on. 400, 0800. Voices in static. Ours, but not ours. The wireless speaks the XO's order half a heartbeat after he gives it, then a heartbeat before. The boy, Deckhand Fisher, cried. I had words with him. He says his mother called his name from the speaker. I reminded him his mother is dead. He says that is why he is afraid. The boy beside me made a sound in his throat. Fisher, he said hoarsely, like the name doesn't belong to him but might as well. He thumbed his photo until the plastic crackled. 0800 1200. Something struck us. Nothing on water? Engineer reports no damage, but I do not believe him. The hull trembles now and then, like an old dog in sleep. The mate rubbed his palm over his jaw, rasping bristle. He kept his other hand flat on the table near the radio, not touching it, the way you set a hand near a hot stove to feel heat without burning. 1200, 1600. Rain ceased. Sea without whitecaps, but the sound of wind continues on the wireless. Repeated interference, single word. Answer. I refuse. Men talk of omens. XO tells a story about a twin ship. I instructed him to keep his stories. The mate looked away. The captain didn't. I turned another page. The next lines tipped off the exact edge where routine breaks and stays broken. 1600, 2000. Saw her. Not a trawler, not a tanker. A ship like ours, but not ours. She burns with lights she should not have. Men on her rail, us, but not us. The boy fainted at the sight of himself. The wireless stares at me with no eyes and says my name. I do not write the name here. My own name pulsed in my ears where it wasn't written. The ink had bled here, not from water, but from pressure. The letters bore down. 2000, 000. Blackout. 2 seconds? 3? In the dark, I felt our decks change under my feet. I believed we were there, not here. When light returned, we were ourselves again. Or close. I swallowed and found my mouth dry. The mate swore softly, and then apologized to no one. 00400. Jacket found in boy's bunk, wet, labeled in his hand. He says he left it dry. He says he sewed the seam himself and shows me the crooked stitch. He asks if I believe him. I do not answer. The boy closed his eyes and opened them again. 00400, 0800. I went alone to the wireless room and sat with the static. It seemed to lean toward me. I did not speak. It waited. I did not speak. It whispered my name, and I did not write it here. I will not. The next page fought me. Salt had glued it to the one behind, and when I pried them apart, a corner tore away. The rip ran like a scar through the words that followed. 0800, 1200. We launched the boat. We went to them. The light found me and poured sound into my eyes. My double stood in the beam and moved when I moved. And then before, I did not answer. I did not answer. I did not. The sentence staggered, then resumed, smaller. Answer. The captain's hands were on the table now, spread as if to steady himself. The scars on his knuckles looked newer in that light. There were only a few entries left. The handwriting had changed. The careful lines loosened, the letters stretched apart. The ink faded where the pen had stuttered. 1200, 1600. They gave us a raft. 1600, 2000. Inside this book. 2000, 000. The radio with no power speaks when it pleases. It says the boy's name. It says the XO's. Sometimes mine. I am writing in a small hand because there is less room in the world than there was yesterday. The boy's breath hitched. The mate tried the old attack lines. Nonsense, hysteria, fatigue. But they didn't make it past his teeth. I could feel the room listening with us. Not the men, the room, the wires and the walls, the instruments, the tables, the metal. Ship steel remembers voices after years. Ask any engineer who slept in an engine room. He'll tell you. Sound gets into things. It doesn't come out easily. I turned to the last page. The final sheet had wrinkled into a landscape of ridges and valleys. The ink pooled in the low parts and paled on the high. The pen had etched lines into the fibers, not just on the surface, but deep, like the writer had tried to make the words climb down into the paper and hide. "Last watch," it began. No hour, no neat 0400, 0800, just last. Sea flat as glass, wind only on the wireless. Men at the rail are patient now. They do not wave, they wait. When we move, they move. When we do not, they do not. We dropped a wrench and one fell on their deck a half-second later. Where did it drop from? Where does anything drop from? The letters thinned, then bolded again, as if the writer had lifted his pen to listen and then pushed hard to speak over what he heard. The wireless does not want us to talk. It wants us to answer. That is different. Anyone can talk. An answer is agreement. The captain's lips moved, repeating that last sentence silently. Agreement. I have served at sea 34 years. I have hauled fish and cargo and men more stubborn than both. I have seen ice on black water in June and storms that tore the horizon in half. I have lost friends. I have buried a son. I do not frighten easily. I am frightened now. The mate blew out a breath. It shook. He turned his eyes away so we wouldn't see. We have sent the raft with this log because we do not know which way is out anymore. A raft knows only out. It is made for a way. If you read this, then we are still at sea. The line stood alone. Even the ink seemed to leave space around it. If you read this, then time is not a line the way we were taught. It is a drift net. We are caught in it. And sometimes our voices pull through, and sometimes yours do. And sometimes we look up and see each other through the mesh and think, there I am. But it is not you. And it is. And that is the part that unmans a man. The boy made a small sound that could have been a sob or a laugh. The captain didn't move. I do not know if the ocean can forgive a question. I do not know if a wireless has a God. But I know this. Do not answer. The words had been pressed so hard they cut. The pen had stabbed through, and on the inside of the back cover, I could see the dents pushed up like scars. Never answer. There was no signature. Or if there had been, water had taken it. I didn't know I had leaned so close until my breath fogged the plastic cover we'd set over the page to keep the rest from degrading. I straightened. The mate spoke first, because he always did. "Old sailors," he said, and then stopped, because whatever joke he had stored up died when he tried to hand it oxygen. The boy whispered, "We should throw it overboard." "No," the captain said. He didn't say why. He didn't have to. You don't throw the map away when you find yourself somewhere the map says doesn't exist. You keep it, even if it was drawn by a madman's hand. My eyes dropped to the radio on the table without my permission. It sat where I'd left it, ugly as a brick. Its dial was dark. Its speaker was dead. Its antenna leaned like a broken stalk. I felt the air change. There's a moment in any room with electricity when you know a machine has woken up, even before it tells you. That tiny, pre-sound itch. The tickle of the coil, the way the hairs on your wrist take notice. The old handheld drew breath. No click of a switch. No green LED coming alive. Just the sound itself. As if the speaker had decided it didn't need power, it only needed a will. Static slid into the room like a thin animal. The mate flinched. The boy backed up until he found the bulkhead with his shoulders. The captain didn't move at all. The static wasn't the angry kind, not the burst and spit of a storm crossing frequencies. This was careful, Patient. It had intent. It found the corners, tested the ceiling, rolled down under the table, climbed up our shins. It explored. It liked what it found. It doesn't have a battery, the mate said, his voice high. It can't. Quiet, the captain said softly. The boy whispered, "We should throw it overboard." "No," the captain said. He didn't say why. He didn't have to. You don't throw the map away when you find yourself somewhere the map says doesn't exist. You keep it, even if it was drawn by a madman's hand. My eyes dropped to the radio on the table without my permission. It sat where I'd left it, ugly as a brick. Its dial was dark. Its speaker was dead. Its antenna leaned like a broken stalk. I felt the air change. There's a moment in any room with electricity when you know a machine has woken up, even before it tells you. That tiny, pre-sound itch. The tickle of the coil, the way the hairs on your wrist take notice. The old handheld drew breath. No click of a switch. No green LED coming alive. Just the sound itself. As if the speaker had decided it didn't need power, it only needed a will. Static slid into the room like a thin animal. The mate flinched. The boy backed up until he found the bulkhead with his shoulders. The captain didn't move at all. The static wasn't the angry kind, not the burst and spit of a storm crossing frequencies. This was careful, patient. It had intent. It found the corners, tested the ceiling, rolled down under the table, climbed up our shins. It explored. It liked what it found. It doesn't have a battery, the mate said, his voice high. It can't. Quiet, the captain said softly. The room held its breath with me. I could feel the captain's eyes, the mate's, the boys'. I could feel the storm test the windows with soft fingers and then retreat. Bored. I could feel the ship flex and resettle around us, choosing, for now, to be only steel and not a throat. The radio said my name a third time. The syllables rose in the middle like a question. My tongue moved without permission. I forced it still. I thought of the line in the log, the ones cut into the paper so deep they outlived the ink. Do not answer. Never answer. I did the smallest thing I could do that still counted as a decision. I turned my head away. Not a lot. Just enough to break the absolute line between the sound and my face. The static sighed. I swear it sighed. Disappointed, amused, who knows. It thinned. It found a new shape. The hush of a distant breaker. The night noise of far-off highway tires. A freighter's breath leagues away. Then it drew back the way a tide does when it's tired of testing ashore. It didn't go entirely. It never does. It kept a toe in the room. No one spoke for a long time. The captain finally closed the logbook with a care that felt like a salute to a man he would never meet. He set his palm on its cover. He didn't look at the radio. "We'll make a note," he said, absurd and right, because sailors always make notes. "We'll secure the raft. We'll make ready for morning." The mate nodded like a puppet. The boy wiped his face with the heel of his hand. I put my palm on the table to feel something that belonged to this ship and not to a story. Outside, the storm shifted. That was all. The radio lay quiet. For now. And in the quiet, the last words on the last page crawled through me again. Not ink anymore, but instruction. If you read this, we are still at sea. Do not answer. Never answer. Dawn came like it never knew there'd been a storm. A gray light unspooled across the water, soft and careful. And the rain that had chased us all night slipped away, as if it had somewhere else to be. The ocean flattened to long, tired swells, and the sky opened a pale seam in the east. You know that hour on a highway, just before sunrise, when the world is washed in a color that isn't quite blue and isn't quite white, and every sound is softer because the day hasn't cleared its throat yet? That's what it felt like. The Atlantic had put a finger to its lips. We stood on deck not speaking. Men who, a few hours earlier, had shouted orders by reflex now found no words at all. The lifeboat swung inboard again, the davits moaned, the blocks whispered, and the painter rope left a wet diagonal across the deck, like a line someone had drawn to prove we'd gone and come back. The raft, their raft, lay belly down near the companionway, secured under a tarp, meek as a curled dog. The captain had lashed it himself with hands that didn't quite shake. We searched because men at sea don't not search. Binoculars passed from face to face. Radar cast its green eyelid across the horizon, blinking, blinking, showing a world that contained only us. No smudge of stacked smoke, no tooth of mast, no gulls congregating where scraps rise from a disaster. Nothing. Where was she? The mate asked, not looking at anyone. The captain raised his binoculars, lowered them, and did not answer. The boy hugged himself against the morning cold. He kept touching the breast pocket where his wife's photo slept, as if he needed to confirm, each time, that her face hadn't floated off into the night while we weren't watching. We made a slow circle on the coordinates we'd logged. Once, twice, 3 times. It felt like going over the same patch of highway after you think you hit something. Your eyes convinced you'll see it on the second pass, your hands convincing themselves you didn't. The ocean paid us no mind. It rose and sank like a sleeping chest. By 7, the light had grown honest. We stowed the lifeboat. We mopped the deck where brine had dried to a crust the color of old coins. The captain sent me below with the logbook to set it against the fan's dry breath. Page corners fanned like feathers. The old handheld radio sat beside it, its rubber antenna bent like a cattail in windless air. It was still. It was so still you could believe what happened had not involved it at all. You learn at sea that the morning after teaches you how to think about the night. If the day breaks with wreckage under your feet, your mind has one job: count the damage and fix what you can. If the day breaks clean, your mind invents a different job. Decide what happened and what you will dare to name. Our day broke clean, so we went to work scrubbing the words out of it. The captain wrote an entry. He used phrases with edges: unidentified light source, uncorrelated visual contact, no radar confirmation, recovered unmarked raft. Words like rope, they teach you to coil properly. He didn't write about the voices, or the searchlight that carried sound, or eyes that whispered. He didn't write answer. He didn't write my name. The mate signed as witness with a hand that steadied as ink met paper. He was good at that, finding the line he could walk. We raised the weather reports. The frequency sounded like it always did in the morning. Official, bored, a little grain caught in the throat. When I keyed the mic, my thumb trembled and steadied and trembled again. I gave what I was supposed to give. Wind, sea state, position. I told no one what the sea had asked of us. If you stood very still in the radio room, you could hear the ship remembering. Not much. Not a story. Just the tiny ticks things make after a long night. the brittle ping of a cooling bracket, the sigh of a gasket settling in its housing, the neck of a coffee thermos releasing a breath it had held for hours. The room did not say my name. The handheld did not wake. By noon, the sky cleared above us like a promise sworn by someone who owes you nothing. The captain set the crew to their tasks the way he always had. Rust doesn't stop chewing just because a ghost ship vanishes. Paint doesn't stop flaking. The world keeps asking for the same work it asked yesterday. We chipped and scrubbed and checked lashings, as if the right shape of a day could argue last night into a corner. But shape or no shape, the corners stayed. When we came off watch, I found myself standing by the rail where, hours before, I'd seen our doubles tilt their heads in the same angle. The water's face had new wrinkles. The light laid a different hand over it. The place where we had been pinned by a beam was not now any different from the place 5 feet left or right. It felt obscene and comforting at once. "Empty," the mate said, materializing beside me. "It's just empty." He said it like a man who has decided the answer and needs to hear his own mouth make it true. I didn't argue. I didn't agree. The boy didn't come up on deck that afternoon. The captain let him sleep, or pretend to sleep, or sit in the dark with a photograph and try to scrape a night out of his eyes. No one wrote that in a log. By sunset, we had turned our bow toward the shipping lanes. The ocean resumed its sentence. The day filed itself. By midnight, we were a ship again. Small in a world too big for anyone's story. And the static, when I let a little of it into the room, sounded like static does when it behaves. Impersonal, harmless, uninterested in names. We carried the raft. We carried the log. We carried a radio that pretended to be a brick. The morning after tasted like work. We made port days later. The harbor looked the way harbors do. Cranes like bent fingers, gulls that refused to be dignified. The air thick with the smell of fuel and frying batter. We tied up. We took on provisions. We fixed what had broken in the storm. We handed our paperwork across a counter to a man whose job is to count ships and make sure none of them claim to have seen the dead. I gave a copy of the official entry to a uniform with a polite face and eyes that never lifted to mine. He stamped. He initialed. He filed. "Strange lights," he said, marking a box with a straight line. Always something. He didn't ask about the raft. He didn't want us to give him more work. We stowed the logbook in a drawer that smelled of ink and old carbon paper. We put the radio in a locker that smelled of rubber and mold. We passed under a bridge and out to sea again. And in that clean, bureaucratic morning, the last of the voices from that night did something I didn't expect. They went quiet, not gone. Quiet the way a dog is quiet when it has your shoe in its mouth and is waiting to see if you'll chase. That's how it ended that day. Not with a chase. With a shoe in a closed jaw, watching. Years do something to the mind. They sand the edges of your stories and leave the grain. If you keep telling a thing, you learn which words keep it standing. If you keep refusing to tell it, the thing learns to live in your bone and not in your throat. I didn't tell this one. Not for a long time. Men left. Some to shore, some farther out than shore can see. The captain retired within the year. He sold his pipe in a box of clattering odds and ends at a yard sale where strangers will trade a quarter for a life. He bought a small house with a view of the kind of water that never tries to kill you. And he sat on the porch in a chair that remembered him when he stood up. He lived a quiet life until quiet became indistinguishable from the end of things. When he went in a chair, looking at a horizon that never moved. The mate shipped out again and again, Because some men, if they stop, will let other kinds of silence catch them. He mocked superstitions with more bite than before, like someone whistling past a particular grave. He grew louder in ports and softer at sea. Once, years later, I crossed him in a dockside bar with a jukebox that leaned toward the country out of habit. He looked through me like I was glass until I said his name. Then he looked around himself like the room had shifted and squeezed my shoulder hard enough to bruise. He told me he didn't dream. I believed him because I could tell he needed me to. The boy, the kid with the photo, went home. He didn't go back to sea. He took a job fixing appliances in a town where the loudest thing at night is a porch light drawing moths. His wife had the baby, and the baby grew into a boy. And one summer afternoon, the three of them drove to the shore and stood ankle deep where the waves tumble lazy and clean. He sent me a postcard with a picture of a lighthouse. Blue sky, tourists with ice cream. And on the back he wrote, "Do you ever hear it when the TV goes between channels?" I didn't write back. He didn't write again. Years later, a mutual friend said he kept to the house, that he'd started sleeping with a fan on because the constant hush helped him sleep. That's all I know. That's all I want to. As for me, I kept sailing long enough to prove to myself I could. Then I stopped because the proof wasn't worth the currency I was paying. I took work that kept me close to radios, but not to the sea. Installations, repairs, the quiet rituals of cokes and solder. I had a small bench by a small window that let in a small square of sky. I drank coffee that tasted like coffee instead of like the inside of a thermos. Sometimes, on good days, I forgot to be afraid. I never let static play for long. In the car, if a station slipped and Hiss stepped in, I swiped the dial fast like I'd brushed a hot pan. In waiting rooms, if a television went between channels and loosed that lazy snow sound into the carpeted air, I stood up and asked for the remote with a smile that had too many teeth. Friends thought I was particular. Lovers thought I was quaint. Nobody thought answer the way I did. The logbook? I kept a copy of those last pages in a folder I don't open often. The original is somewhere proper now, in a place with climate control and a faint smell of curated dust. You can file anything if the paper is heavy enough and the stamp comes down square. No one put it in a glass case. Good. Doesn't want to be looked at. Wants to be found in a drawer you shouldn't open and read under a light you forgot to turn off. The radio from the Raft? It sat in my closet for years, wrapped in cloth, taped in a box with a name that meant nothing. Seasonal decorations. I wrote that to lie to myself. Twice, moving apartments, I nearly threw it out. Twice, I didn't. Both times I slept badly for a week after, as if some part of me had been disappointed to still own the choice to throw it away. Sometimes at night I take walks. The city's a sea if you squint. Long black lanes, buoys of sodium lamps. The hush of traffic like a tide that never decides to come in or go out. I pass storefronts with televisions left on to keep the thieves company. When the picture goes to snow, I quicken my step. I pretend I'm cold. It's August. You learn to live with the kind of fear that never needs you to run. It sits in the passenger seat, adjusts the mirror, says nothing, stares at the road. It doesn't force. It waits to be invited. There is a sentence I carry that I don't say out loud if I can help it. I'm saying it now because you asked. Because I started talking and discovered I didn't want to stop before I put it somewhere it could be heard. Out of all of us, I'm the one left telling it. That's not hero talk. It's inventory. The others went where they went. Some into the water because water is what they were. Some into rooms with the blinds half drawn because daylight can be a kind of static too. I don't know if that makes me lucky. I know it makes me the one who still has to decide what to do when the air goes white. So here is my confession. From a man who has learned to time his breaths to the silence between stations. Of the whole crew, I'm the one who stayed. The others left. Some to the sea, some into themselves. And on certain nights, when the city grows as quiet as the ocean used to, I swear I can hear the Atlantic again. Not the waves, the space between them. Sometimes, driving late, I forget. I let the radio wander. The station fades at the edge of its range, and the world turns to a soft, busy hush. It's harmless. It's nothing. It's a sound that fills the cracks between real things. Then, folded into that nothing, like a note tucked into a coat I haven't worn in years, I hear it. My name. Not always. Not loud. Just accurate and patient. And exactly where it would sit if someone who knew me well had spoken across a long table and was waiting, politely, for me to look up. I change the station fast. I tap the button the way you tap the brakes when you see an animal at the shoulder. I tell myself I'm being silly. I tell myself I'm tired. I tell myself the same story any adult tells himself when the edges of the world come loose and he has to choose whether to tug. But there's a part of me that doesn't reach for the dial. There's a part of me that, for the length of a breath, sits very still and listens. Not because I want to be called, because I want to answer. I know what the book said. I know the lines that cut the page. I know what the captain's face looked like when he chose the kind of courage that doesn't ship out on monuments. Do not answer. Never answer. I have obeyed that law longer than any law I ever swore to. And yet, honesty is a debt we owe the dead and the living both. There is a night coming, perhaps soon, perhaps far, when I will be tired in just the way that makes a man honest with whatever calls him. On that night, the static will rise like a tide against glass. It will speak my name the way it did the first time, the way it has a dozen times since, the way it has learned to say it as if I taught it. And I will not reach for the dial. I will not clear my throat. I will not pretend I didn't hear. I will do the one small, terrible, merciful thing that turns a sound into a bridge. I will answer. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit the bell so you won't miss what's next.